Hey everybody, I decided I was going to make a quick video about my monobloc carburetor that I have here. I've been rebuilding a T100 Triumph the last couple of years, and I got it all done, threw it all together, and found out that I was having a lot of trouble with the monoblocks. So I figured I'd make this video in case you've got a monobloc and maybe just show you some of the things that I've learned about them. Hopefully make things a little easier for you. So monoblocks stopped being used on the T100s around, I think it was 1968. They moved to the concentric carburetor after that, but my bike has two carburetors. One's the regular sized carburetor, it's got the float bowl that's all the way out to here. The second one's a chopped one, so it doesn't have the float. Well, it has a float chamber, but doesn't have a float inside of it. The fuel level gets set with the float in this one, and then there's a connecting line over here to the other one, and the gas will just get set to the same level as what's in here. So I guess the biggest issue I'm seeing with this is that it's a zinc bodied carburetor that's hard mounted to the intake manifold by a couple of bolts. So the zinc is a really soft metal, and it warps easily. And so if you have your flange mounted to the intake right here and you over tighten these two bolts right here, or nuts, what'll happen is this will get pulled in, this will get pulled in. Now you got an air gap over here, but even worse, where your slide is can become egg-shaped. And if the slide's in here and suddenly you're going down the road and you're 3/4 throttle or whatever, it can get stuck if this is warped. So you definitely don't want that to happen. So the bike was owned by someone before me who had a very heavy hand and over tightened everything. So I sent this off to get sleeved. There's, I think, a few different places that do this, but basically someone will turn this to be perfectly round again and put a steel sleeve inside. So I don't know if you can see this or not, but there's actually a steel sleeve in here. So it's not just a completely zinc bodied slide body anymore. So if you do over tighten these flanges, you'll still have an air leak right here, but you shouldn't be concerned about having this get out of round because it's got some more rigidity to it. The slide itself was also sleeved. That's over on the bike. I don't have it here, but I'd highly recommend getting your monobloc sleeved just in case someone does over tighten it. You don't want any issues with that. The other thing that can get over tightened and warped is the float bowl cover. So this is my float bowl cover. When I got it, I wanted to check to see if it was warped or not, but you can see there's like a little plateau in here that prevents you from like setting it on something flat and checking it. So what I did was I found this little cup here that's just the right size to where you can just set it on top and look underneath and check for any gaps. So when I originally had this, I had a big gap between the two bolts right here, and I had to file down underneath here and under here to get it to set flat again. So now I've got it filed down, it's sitting flat. You can actually see where I filed it right there. So now when I set it on the float cover, it'll make a good seal. So let's see, I've gone over the slide warping, the cover warping. The other big issue that I was having was setting the float height. So Amal makes new monoblocks that look just like this, but they're slightly different. And one of the things that the new monoblocks has is a fiber washer that goes right under here where your float needle would seat. If you have an old monobloc like this, you definitely don't want to have that, because then your needle, which, oh, mine fell out. By the time your float has raised up enough to push this in, your float level is going to be too high. Mine was almost up to the top when I first rebuilt it and checked it. So you don't want to have that fiber washer there. It's not going to cause any leaks or anything. You just leave that fiber washer out if you have one. But even then, it's still too high. And the way you know if it's too high or not is right there between the M and the A, there's a little dot, and your fuel level should be about to that dot. So there's different ways that you can check that. You can get a hose that comes off the bottom of the main jet, and you can hold it up in front and see where the fuel level comes up to, which works well enough. But I bought this clear cover here that you can just bolt on, and that way you can actually see what's going on in there and make sure everything's moving the way it should, the float doesn't get stuck. Notice I put a little dot on there because if you put this on the cover here, where those lines cross is not where the pip, that little dot is. So I just laid it on top here and marked where that dot is, so that when I fill it up with gas, I know the level it's supposed to be set at. And getting back to how you set the height, it seems like everyone has trouble with it being too high, and there's really no great way of lowering it. It's not like most carburetors have a way that you can bend a tab or something to raise or lower it. So what I end up doing, which a lot of people do apparently, come on, I put some solder right there on the end. I just took a piece of sandpaper and I hit it real quick just to give it some bite, and I put a little bead of solder on top, and that did the trick. So now when I fill it up with gas, the gas goes up to the correct height, everything's good. Another thing to check out is just make sure around the lip of this that this is actually flat. You can see right down here I actually had a nick. I had to put some JB Weld in there and actually sand it down because someone gouged out the top surface of this. If you fill it up with gas, you start having gas leaking out the bottom. Probably won't be able to see this, but I do have some nicks down here, so I'm going to have to sand this off, put some sandpaper on a piece of glass, and just make sure it's nice and flat and even, so that when we put this up in here, these fiber washers are making good contact and hopefully won't leak. Another thing that went wrong was, I have no idea how this happened, but this main jet holder here, or needle jet holder, my original one, when I put the needle jet on top, it was crooked. And here's the original, and you'll see that the top was damaged, and it is not completely true with the world. So when I threaded it down and tightened it up, it was bent over at an angle. So I had to get a new one of these. No idea how that happened, but this one that I bought, nice and flat on top, it's sitting nice and true. The needle will go in and out of this no problem. So what else can we talk about? I guess we'll talk about the pilot circuit while we're here. I didn't know this until later. Most people who have carburetors already know this, but or have worked with carburetors a lot, which I haven't. There's a very, 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 very tiny hole near the flange where gas comes out, an air gas mixture. This is your pilot screw. You want to, if you don't know what should be set to, if everything's clean, you should be able to turn this all the way in and then back out 1.5 turns to get you started. But there's a very tiny hole in there, and I took a guitar string and just made sure it wasn't blocked, is during your pilot circuit where your throttle's closed, the slide is blocking off this entire area, so air can't get through. So your air comes in, I forget which one of these two holes here, comes over to here, mixes with gas behind that screw, and it comes out here. So if your bike doesn't want to start, or it only works when you got your throttle cracked open a little bit, make sure that that little hole inside there is not blocked. I think that's about all I wanted to talk about. I might make another video later if I encounter any more issues, but I guess while we're at it, might as well just mention, you know, this is a brand new float. Make absolutely certain that front is actually pointing out when you put it in here. So I did put it in backwards at one point, and I can tell you it doesn't work too well when it's backwards. Oh, one last thing. This is your insulator block. I bought this because the other one was crushed from them over tightening the bolts previously. So you can buy these in different thicknesses. I wouldn't advise you to get one this thick if you have two carburetors. Maybe even if you have one, I wouldn't suggest getting one this thick, because by the time you've got it all stacked up inside the engine and you got your air filter on the back, you basically have to take at least on my bike, you have to take the oil tank off to get this thing in there. There's like no room whatsoever. So anything that you can do to get rid of any sort of stack up to push this thing out, you want it to be close to the bike if you can, so that way you're not interfering with the oil tank or the toolbox, depending on which side of the bike you're on. And absolutely do not put this gasket against this surface, because you will get an air leak. This goes up here, the gasket goes against the inlet manifold. If you don't do that, you're going to have a bad time. Ask me how I know. Also, these screw holes here are 2BA. If you're like me, you had a really crappy bike to start out with, these might have a bunch of gunk in there, so you might want to chase them out with a 2BA tap. Make sure it's not a pointed one, because otherwise when you try chasing this hole out, you might end up dinging the inside of the slide chamber. Again, ask me how I know that. Everything's good and everything, but I did end up with a little tiny raised portion in there, which I was able to actually file down. Hopefully it doesn't cause any harm. We'll find out when I start it up. But that's about it for now. Hopefully this was informative for some of you. See you later.